This is Phantom Electric Ghost, and we're live on the air with John Brink for the first time. And I want to welcome you to the Phantom Electric Ghost podcast. How are you doing tonight?
I'm doing well, Keith. I hope you're doing well too.
Want to let people know that we are a featured podcast on Newsly. You can see that icon up there that says listen on Newsly. They are a sponsor of the podcast. And later tonight, people can hear an audio only version of that on Newsly. For those of you who want to try that out, if you use coupon code GHOST, you can get that for 30 days free to check it out. No obligation. And want to let people know that we're actually at episode 1032 with this episode, tracking down Apple Podcasts since 2016. And again, for those who don't are listening rather than watching, you can actually go to www.johnabrink.com, and that URL will be clickable, so you can find out more about John at that link. And maybe you can tell people, like, if they click on that link, what do they find there?
Everything about us, our podcast, our social media connections, everything pretty well. Our books, I'm an author as well. I have several books that I've written, and we'll talk about it a little bit later. And then I'm also, for your information, I'm a bodybuilder at 83 years old. I think I'm the oldest competitive bodybuilder in North America. Qualified for the Arnolds, and then I'm a public speaker, and I'm a podcaster, not quite as big as you are. I've been doing it since before COVID. So about 200 podcasts in that area from around the globe.
That's awesome. You like have a lot of hats. Like I hold a lot of hats myself. I'm a software developer by day, a music producer, and a podcaster. So I kind of have a couple of things I do, but that's kind of like the way things are. Like a lot of times, like people are multifaceted, and people might only know one aspect of a person, but I would find after talking to a lot of people on this podcast that people have a lot of, different things that they do. And sometimes their side gigs or the other things they do are they feel that more than maybe their day job. But this is where we talk to people to get their point of view. So I know you're 82 years young, and you've been 83 now. Okay,
yeah, I was going by November the 1st. That's my birthday.
So wow,
83.
Yeah, 83. That's awesome.
83 years young.
Young, yes. And you're a bodybuilder. We can get into that. That's amazing.
Yes.
You're an author, and you're a podcaster, and you've been a CEO. So maybe you can kind of give a brief background. I know I'll give a little bit from your bio. You were born in Nazi-occupied Holland in the beginning of the Second World War. And you talked about how your father was drafted into the Dutch army, and you were liberated by Canadian soldiers in 1945. So maybe you can talk more about, go into it deeper, your background, but that's kind of some of the highlights from your bio.
Okay, so thanks, Keith. And then, so I was born November the 1st, 1940, and Holland was invaded by the German army in April of 1940, and my dad was drafted into the Dutch army. And the last time they heard from him, he was seen in Rotterdam, the big city that was bombed by the Germans, and thousands of people died. So my mom would not know if he had survived for 5 years. I was the youngest, born in November of 1940. She was pregnant with me when he left. And then I had a sister 1 year older, brother 2 years older. And so they had a tough go. I still remember things from when I was about 3.5, 4 years old. Hundreds of planes in the air bombing the Germans, especially their cities and their infrastructure for conducting the war. And again, look at northeastern Holland is close to the border into the North Sea, just over on the other side of the border, about 15 minutes away by car, with the German infrastructure touching the North Sea. So Hamburg, Kiel, Bremen, all those infrastructures were bombed by the Allied forces. And I still, even now at 3.5, 4 years old, I remember hundreds of planes in the air, daytime, nighttime bombing, up to 300 big bombers. And it always kind of stayed with you. And then my mom would take our kids out when they were bombing, especially at nights, not to look at it and say, oh, this is beautiful. But it was safer to be outside than inside the house.
Yeah, it's like an earthquake. You don't want to be inside a building.
No,
It's the same kind of
no.
idea.
And in the distance, we could see the cities burning. And so it was a tough go. And then especially the winter of 1944-45 was the hunger winter. It was extremely
Mm.
cold and there was no more food. The Germans had cut off all the flow of food into our area. And as kids, we would every morning go with gunny sacks into the railroad yards and pick up anything edible and burnable. And the reason that we did as kids, because the Germans wouldn't shoot us, they just booed us one. And the following day, we'd be back. And
Well,
but I still remember even now the winter 1944 was 45 was the hunger winter, and it was the coldest one on record. And I still can feel even now today still the feeling of hunger and the feeling of extreme cold. And then the other ones, the feeling of anxiety of losing the one parent, the only one we had, because everybody else was busy with their own stuff. So and then in the winter or in the April the 12th, 1945, we were liberated by the Canadian Army, April the 12th, 1945. And it made such an impression on me. It was rough going when they came in because we were close to the German border and the Canadians were pushing out the Germans. And we saw far too much that we should not have seen. Dead
yes, yeah,
bodies,
it
you
must be hard.
know.
Yeah, that's a hard thing to go through war. I mean, anybody. I think a lot of people today, that maybe grow up in the U.S. and haven't been exposed. We have a volunteer army now, not
Exactly.
draft. So a lot of people don't feel what goes on because it's like a volunteer army. It's not a draft army. And so,
Exactly.
like, so my, I have family that had been, in that period, and talk about the difference in terms of it being exposed to, like Vietnam or Korea, or some of my, relatives had been involved in World War II. But it's like, I think there's a disconnect between what that kind of situation, and you grew up in it. And so that
Exactly.
I think there's sometimes people don't understand like the consequences, because like you were dealing with the consequences of what Hitler did. Like your
Exactly.
country was dealing, and people will kind of now they wink and nod toward fascists and dictators and oligarchs, and they act like, well, that's okay. Like, I don't think you guys have read your history.
No, and very
It seems like
appropriate. Yeah, I still remember that point that we were liberated by the Canadian Army. I knew from that point forward, it was my dream to go to Canada and to the land of my heroes. But to come back to what you were saying about, I still, even now, I was 5 years old. That is 78 years later. It still affected me by PTSD, the inner child, and that for all those people that may think that a war happens and then after the war everything is back to normal, not so. It will change one generation and maybe even a second one, and that too often we think too lightly about the democratic system, how precious it is. And let me assure you from experience, it can change so quickly. Overnight, you may have a dictatorship, and then look around the country, around the world. You have an example is Hitler, as you said. The other example is Putin. The other
yeah,
one, North Korea, is Kim. The other
yeah,
example is Iran, and just go on, and then China, and
China itself,
then we in North America and Canada and the U.S. I fly a lot, in my businesses that I have, and I look outside the window either in the United States or in Canada. I look outside, it says paradise, and then I watch the news and I hear these people talking about, well, government, whatever, the democratic government is precious. because
Yeah.
that's how it all started. And before you know it, and far too close, have we come to the point of accepting dictatorship as an option. And that is by people that are naive. They have no idea what it means. Look, in Venezuela, it's a good example. Where they pack people into planes and they just kick them out of there, and
Yeah.
or having not knowing, and that happened in our town where we lived in Holland in the Second World War. They knock at your door, they take part of your family, and they never come back. And so it's the democratic system is precious, and not enough people fully appreciate what a dictatorship means. But that then being said, I, my dream was to go to Canada, and I wanted to go when I was 17, and my parents wouldn't let me, and so I got drafted in. There was a draft in Holland, and I was drafted into the Air Force for 30 months, and then it was a good experience actually, but in special forces, so it gave me a good training. And then I worked in the lumber industry, and we'll come back to a little bit later as to why lumber. That became part of my future actually, and then I finally knew I want when I was 23, and I was not very successful academically. I failed grade 3 and I failed grade 7 3 times. And then they said, what are we going to do with this guy? Should we send him to a mentally challenged school? My parents were beautiful persons, and now they decided, then let's get him a trade. And so they sent me to a
Hmm.
furniture factory, and I became a furniture maker. And I loved the lumber industry, and so but I always kind of felt I had failed, because my friends in the school that went on to college and then university, and for me, I went to work and got a job when I was 14. And a lot of times in Holland, what happened is that if you, at some point, you get married, you have to want to get a job and a career, and then you want to buy a house, and then they say, where are your diplomas? Well, I have
Oh
no
yeah, they're looking for that. Yeah.
And so
Like,
I felt I had to start anew again. And so I emigrated to Canada when I was 23. I took a suitcase. I had 2 sets of clothes, 3 books, and I took $150 Canadian dollars and left Amsterdam. And I couldn't speak the language, didn't know a soul, didn't have a job. But I wanted to build a lumber mill. That was my dream. So I had to go to, for those that are familiar with Canada, British Columbia is on the west coast of Canada, and it's a beautiful, beautiful province, and it has a lot of timber. And so I wanted to go to British Columbia. And when I arrived in Vancouver, then I went to the immigration department. Unfortunately, there was a German fellow that I could speak some German. I told him what I wanted to do. He said, go to, and that's where I am today, to Prince George, which is about 500 miles north of Vancouver. And so that's where I came off the bus in July of 1964, and with my suitcase, my 2 sets of clothes, and my 3 books. And I counted my money in my pocket, and I had exactly $25.47. I counted it 3 times.
wow.
But what I had plenty of is attitude. I always,
Hmm.
even when I was young, I believed that if today is a tough day, tomorrow is a better one. The other one, I have a passion with all the things that I do still today. I give it all that I got, and then work ethic. I work harder than anybody, but will follow is success. And I wanted to build a lumber mill, and it didn't take very long. I was a cleanup man, then a lumber pilot, and then before you know it, I already was managing a sawmill, and then I started a lumber mill, and 10 years after I got here, and today, not bragging about what I have, but about 10 different companies that I own, and I'm very, very involved in obviously all the other things that I do.
Well, I
Uh,
think that's a really impressive thing that a lot of people, there's been waves of people in our country today. They're talking all this anti-immigration. They're always thinking that the immigrants going to come and take jobs or going to weaken the economy. this whole country, the U.S. and Canada, are nations of immigrants,
That's who
and
they are.
and immigrants usually come with a drive.
Exactly.
And the story of the ones that are not being told, like your story, is not often told enough of how many immigrants actually create businesses, how
Exactly.
many immigrants get patents, how many immigrants are scientists or doctors or they productive members of society where people who make a mistake they get to draw attention to the people who have failures.
Yeah.
And of course, there are people that have situations, but you draw too much attention to the negative rather than the positive, and then you brandish it as just a paintbrush on everybody. And I think it's just people should have more holistic thinking, and you don't necessarily have to be educated to get that. You have to
And,
have a little bit of compassion.
and you're absolutely right, Keith. And it's a proven fact that the problems with immigrants versus the population in terms of things going wrong or problems that happen to them is much lower than they are for the population. Why? Because they're still trying to prove themselves, and they're still building their future. And I don't care about anybody this. Right now, today, we still in North America, Canada, and the United States is the land of opportunity. We are so blessed with plenty and opportunity. And then it is amazing how often politically we trying to destroy it. And because and that is being naive because they have no idea. Think back about I said look back at what happens in other places. Central Europe maybe or Middle East is you look at Putin, you look at China, you look at North Korea, you look at Iran, Venezuela. So we are so fortunate that what they have because it will change overnight and
Yeah.
just not after that come back to normal because it simply doesn't. So the
Yeah,
other thing I was going to mention to you. So
Mhm.
then when I came here, I did that and then the even when I was successful, I was already building companies and doing all of it, and everybody said to me, "Oh, you're so successful," and I didn't feel that. I still felt that failing the grade 3 and then grade 7 three times that I had failed, and so and and
You're
and
still
so
feeling that.
yeah, I did, but then one thing happened to me is that I walked into a store. I was already here for 32 years. In 1997, I came in 65. I walked into a store. I picked up a book. I still don't know why I did that. And I looked in that book that I picked up. The book's title was Driven to Distraction. And I looked at the book, and the book said ADHD. I had never even heard about ADHD.
Oh,
I said, "Oh my God, that's
so maybe
me."
that's part.
And I
You
wrote
figured
in the
out that
book
an issue that you had and you didn't know how to define it.
exactly. And so the other part that I found out much later is ADHD is people in general thought that it was probably 8% of the population. It's more like 20%. There is not a day
Mm.
that goes by that I not encounter people that say, "Hey, I have ADHD." And so that certainly told me a lot. And then the other thing that I should mention to you is that I'm an author as well, amazingly.
Mhm.
And so they always said to me, "You should write a book," and so about your story. And so I wrote a book that was 80 years of my experience, and then it took me 70 years to start it, stop. Writing books is not easy. Start,
Yeah.
stop, and then about 5 years ago, I said, if I don't do it now, it will not happen. So I wrote this book against
Oh,
all
oh,
odds, and
that's awesome.
it's all about the ups and downs, not about hurrah, hurrah, how successful John is, but rather about all the ups and downs in between.
Well, I think it's a process, because somebody who tells you that they just did something overnight is not believable.
No,
Like I'm a musician. It's like everybody talks about overnight sensations. Everybody I've ever seen is like 5, 10 years worth of work, right? It's all
hard
that
work.
practice. It's all the practice. Like
Exactly.
whether you're an athlete or an artist, there's a lot of practice that goes into what you do, and there's a lot of like happy accidents if you want to be, more positive rather than mistakes,
You see,
right?
but people
So
sometimes say to me, you've been successful, you're lucky. I said, no, that's not the way it works. The harder you work, the luckier you get. That's how it works.
yeah, you
But
have to put the time
oh,
in. I mean,
yeah,
I think the problem a lot of people have is perfection.
yeah,
What I've run into is people will not do something. So, well, I'm not going to be Shakespeare, or I'm not going to be Beethoven. I'm not going to be. They compare themselves to somebody that's like, okay, well, you're making it so unattainable
yeah.
that you could never do it, right?
Not,
But if
not
you
so.
say that it's okay, I can try it, and I can, like a lot of the entrepreneurs is like, you see so many different variations, like, of something like the Model T. Why is it a Model T? It's like you go through the letters until you get to the one that works.
Exactly.
Like there's so many iterations. I do design in
Yeah,
software. We do multiple iterations of things. The first thing we do doesn't work. 99% of the time it doesn't work.
no,
Right. So if we gave up, we'd never get it done. So it's like the idea is that you have to actually make mistakes to learn. We have lessons learned. And so many people get scared of that result. And I
yeah,
think it's like you said, it's a wave. It's up and down. It's not, you don't suddenly get from 0 to a 10,000 and you're
no,
there.
no.
It,
It's not
it's a
gonna happen.
it's a progression.
Exactly. And you have to lay that foundation, right? Because once you lay that foundation on which you build, because there is no, you cannot teach somebody experience. That's, you have to live it. And that means you have to fall down in order to stand up again, and then do it once, twice, three times, whatever it takes, and stay the course. And most of the people that we know now, the multi-billionaires and all of those kind of guys, they all went through, they all have a story to tell, and nothing came easy, because that's the way it is. But at the same time, if you have the passion like you have in what you do, and I know already, just by interacting with you, that you have that, and so do I, is then you can do it well. You stay the course, you give it all that you got, and then if all those things don't go quite right, then you stay with it until you got it corrected and go from there.
Yeah, a lot of things are opportunity because we're living in like this information age, and the problem is some people like they look at their numbers, right? They look at the metrics. Like so you go on social media, you get 1 million views, you say that's success.
Yeah,
But I've heard stories where somebody had like 100 views, but a producer saw an emerging artist. They only had 100 views, and then gave them an opportunity. And then it wasn't the 1 million view person that got that opportunity. It was a person that only had 100 views. So it's the
exactly.
quality of the people who actually see your work. And so some people who get dejected and say, "Well, I only got 100 views, so I'm going to give up," are missing the boat because it's a law of attraction, and if you put your stuff out there, it doesn't necessarily have to be the volume of how many people looked at it, but the quality of the people that looked at it and the interest of the people you may have aligned to on the frequency they're on. And then you get opportunities. And those
And stay
opportunities
the,
kind of come out of anywhere.
and stay the course, Keith. Don't give up. Stay with it. Never, ever, ever give up. Always stay the course. And I believe that's the key.
Yeah,
You know.
showing up.
Yeah.
Showing up every day is a
Exactly.
very strong thing to do. My grandpa was a coal miner,
Yeah.
and he said like showing up every day is how I got my house, is how I got my farm, how I
Exactly.
got these cars, because I showed up every day and it was hard, and I didn't give up, but I did it, and then he was able to do other things. It's like you have to be present.
Yeah, and I feel the same, and so that if I show you this once more, the 2547, that's what I had when I came here off the bus, and I didn't have anything, and but I had a dream, and I couldn't speak the language, didn't know a soul, didn't have a job, but I knew that I would get a sawmill, and then the other thing, and that's what happened in 1965, and then now, even now, still. All these years later, nearly 38 years later, I'm still in the mornings. I usually get up at 5:30 in the mornings, and I always think that I'm late. And then I always make my bed when I come up. And then I always look at the day ahead of me, give it everything that I got. I have the passion even now still for all the things that I do.
Well, I think it's important because you tell me like you have a lot of things that you do, but you have like a good regimen. You because you're a bodybuilder, right? So you're taking care of yourself. The fact that you're here, 83 years young, right?
Yeah.
It's in you're in a good enough shape to be a bodybuilder. I think it's that kind of mentality. If you respect yourself, if you respect your body, if you respect your mind, then you do things that are like positive things. Like so, making sure you take care of your body will take care of you. Then you'll have a better mindset and a better like soul and heart. Because if you feel good, you're bound to be more positive about the day than if you don't feel good.
So the interesting part about it is that I'm going to show you another book that I did. Where is that picture of the other one that I just had? I wrote this one, uh,
Hmm.
ADHD Unlocked, and and because so many people talked about it that I felt I had to write it, and so I did that, and it's very very popular actually, and
That's
so
awesome.
yeah, and I thought it was important for me to talk about it because the stigma around it, at least in my little way, the interesting part of the book that I read, Driven to Distraction, that I read in 1997 after I was here already for 32 years, written by Dr. Halliwell in 1990. He's going to be on my podcast in the next week. Amazingly, can you believe it? And 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 so the other thing that I found is that a lot of young people, in particular, they and even older ones, and saying, "What do you do?" And saying, after you finish school, what career are you thinking about?" And a lot of them say to me, "I don't know what to do." I say, "Well, it's very important because that it's going to be a big part of your life, and there are so many people that don't like their jobs
Yeah.
that they are doing. Or I say change, do something different, and
Well, I think
so
you have to find your passion, and I think it's also interesting because you talked about in your early education, you had problems probably because you had ADHD, and
right,
people at your in during that time they didn't know how to identify it.
no,
They didn't try to understand it,
no,
and they just said, "Well, these people, certain kids." Just can't do it, right? And so you
right.
got to go here, you got to go there. I think the world has gotten a little bit more attune because there's people now that can identify, oh, sometimes one size doesn't fit all. And I
Ex-
think
ex-
a lot of times our systems of education and work and everything are designed to say, well, you got to fit in that box.
yes,
Well, a lot of times people don't fit in the box, especially creative people
yeah,
don't fit in the box. And they might have ADHD, but you can still be a valuable member of society if you don't fit the paradigm that everybody thinks you should fit.
the amazing part, Keith, is, and I know it from my podcasting that I've done and all the interaction that I've done. I bet you 25%, if not more than that, one third of all the successful entrepreneurs, ADHD.
Yeah, it makes
And
sense.
they talk to me about it, saying, "How can you do all this? They got 10 companies that you're running. You're an author. You're a public speaker. You're podcasting. All those. How do you do that all?" I said, "ADHD."
Yeah. I think it's like I think creative people, I've run into it with writers, artists, poets, painters. It seems like a lot of times that creative drive, because we get like, I get itchy, like I want to change, right? So a lot of times like I was talking about, I shift genres. I won't just stay in one genre. I'll go into another one. I'll start doing
Exactly.
something visual. And I might not be the best at it, but I'm
Yeah.
willing to attempt things
Exactly.
that people probably think I shouldn't attempt.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
but I don't care because I'm gonna do it. So I
Ex-
think that a lot of times is that drive to push the envelope, to be on the kind of bleeding edge. It's not for people who want to be in a box,
No.
because people in the box, they won't attempt that.
No.
But I think the people who have the ADHD and they have that creative drive and they kind of have that itch, that they don't feel comfortable just doing the same thing every day. So they have their, their mind wanders and they got to go where it goes.
You absolutely right. So the other book that I felt that talking about passion and developing your passion, I wrote another book, Finding Your Passion, Living the Dream. And
Yeah.
then
That's
saying to
all about.
me, okay, John, are you living the dream, John? I say, I am every day. I love it. And then I have to tell you another one is that I'm writing another book, and that will be my fourth one. It's amazing. I was grade 7. And then, growing up in Holland, I spoke dialect in the extreme northeastern part of Holland. They don't even understand me. So I had to acquire to speak High Dutch, and I barely got that under control. Then I'm in Canada. I can't speak English, and I had to. And then I want to become a speaker and a writer, but somehow I did it. The other book that I'm writing, I don't know if you can see it. Can you
Yeah.
see this one?
Yeah. I see it. Living young.
Dying Old.
Oh, I didn't see the bottom part. Yeah. Yeah. Living young. Okay. I can see the full thing now. Living young, dying old.
See a
That's
picture of me
cool.
on there?
Yeah. Is that your bodybuilder?
Yeah.
Yeah. Is that the
me.
bodybuilder?
Yeah.
Is that what that book's about? Is that what it's about?
No, that's not what it is about. I simply show a picture saying that what does this mean? Living young, dying old, is that age is just a number.
Mm-hmm.
What is it about is quality of life, and saying that this body that you have been given is very forgiving, but you can only abuse it for so long, and then
Yeah.
it will not be able to go any further. In fact, I read an article or a book, and in that they quoted a study that was done of 100,000 people in the United States, actually, that had biopsies done to establish as to why they died. Is
Mm-hmm.
that one of them died at old age?
Mm-hmm.
Food for thought, right? And
Yeah.
and
We have a lot of bad outcomes in the U.S. right now, like because.
So the point that I'm making is that be careful with your diet and have exercise. You don't have to be a bodybuilder or anything like that,
Yeah.
but at least get a half an hour, 20 minutes, half an hour a day of being active. Go for a walk or something else, and then be careful with your diet. Like if I go to a grocery store and I buy groceries, I don't go to the center aisles, because all of those products that they
Pre-processed,
have are,
prepackaged. You
yeah,
don't want that stuff.
no,
You want to. I think the problem with America, I would just kind of digress, is like people get caught up in their jobs to such a degree that they don't cook for themselves. They don't look at the ingredients. They go for the quick fix. They go for the quick, processed meal. The
yes,
thing that's like they're already kind of stressed out, so they're drinking something that comes from some corporate company that's it's highly processed. They're under stress already. It's high fat, it's high carbs, it's high sugar. It's got all kinds of chemicals in it, and they don't take the time to say, "Hey, I'm gonna go make a fresh breakfast. I'm gonna do my own lunch. I'm gonna do my own dinner." They say, "Well, I'm too stressed out. I'm working 70 hours a week. I can't cook." And then they get on that train, and then I don't have time to exercise because I'm doing 70 hours a week. So I don't have time to go to the gym, and I don't have time to do this. I think it's like you have to set boundaries, because
exactly.
if you don't set the boundaries, they'll use you. I mean, the systems will use you. And if they see that you'll give it all and then you die, it's like, but they don't care, they'll find somebody else. It's like you've got to give yourself the time.
It's your body, and it's your future, and for all the reasons that you said, your body extremely forgiving. It will take a certain amount of abuse, and then at one point, far too early from when you should die, you're going to get sick of something, and usually it involves things related to diet. Diet is absolutely critical. There is enough information out there for people to understand it. And in my case, I'm lucky. My wife is vegan, and I'm probably 80-20. And so my body to me is very, very important, and
You get
that's
the
why
right
I go to
nutrition.
the gym. Not to be a bodybuilder, just gave me a goal, but
Yeah,
and I've done so, but just to stay fit and healthy in terms of diet. And then the other part, Keith, was important. You have that as well, mentally. Be attitude. Uh, bless your how fortunate we are looking around the world where we are, and we covered that already. But you know, it's such a precious life, and I want to be 120.
yeah. I mean, it's possible. I think a lot of people, they get so stressed out from all the inputs. It's like being an artist. What I've learned is to give myself some time to have get away from the noise.
Yeah,
Right. So I live in New Hampshire. We have these pines forest. I like to go for walks along the river trails.
yeah,
I like to
beautiful area.
mountain bike. I like to hike. I like to snowshoe. That's
Right,
why I live in New Hampshire
exactly.
because, and I made a decision like 5 years ago to not be a road warrior anymore, jumping on the planes. Now I used to have to go to clients and go on planes and be going Sunday to Thursday, jumping in an Uber, jumping on the plane. And that
Yeah,
was like stressing me out. And I said, I don't have to do that. I trust myself. I know my capabilities. Now
yeah,
I'm a consultant. I work remotely and
yeah,
I get to do the podcast. I get to do my music. I get to
yeah.
do my software work and I get to do my bike rides and my
Paradise.
hiking and my cooking. And so I took away all those crazy commutes where I was giving up my time and thinking I needed to do that to prove something. I don't have I needed the space. And you
Exactly.
like you said, you have to set the boundary. I need the
Exactly.
boundary so I can cook, so
Yeah,
I can take my walk, so
yeah,
I can sleep, so
yeah.
I can have a certain amount of time and do my exercise. If you feel like, well, I can't even do that because the requirements mean I can't do it, you've got to kind of challenge that paradigm.
Exactly. Exactly. Precisely like that. Yeah, so it's because everything is so temporary. Because that I know so many people that already at a young age of maybe in their 40s or 50s, and saying, "Well, I can't do that anymore. I'm too old." So never. So you're never too old, and
Yeah, I mean, so many people have started new careers. I mean, on this podcast, I've talked to so many entrepreneurs. They're in their 50s or their late 40s or 60s that start their life over because they got rid of their self-limiting beliefs. They got rid of this imposter syndrome. And they said, you know what? I always wanted to be a writer, but my parents told me that's kind of foo-foo and you can't do that. Or I want to
exactly,
be a painter. I want to be a film director. I want to have my own business. And people told me, no, you can't do that. You got to work for Fortune 500. And then finally they realized like there's nothing stopping me but myself.
exactly.
And so
At
there's some
any
maturity.
age,
Yeah, there's a maturity seems to happen where people are willing. And I've seen the young people. There's a lot of young entrepreneurs. There's a lot of 20 somethings and 30 somethings that I say like I don't have to do what grandpa did. I don't have to do what my mom did or my
exactly,
uncle did. They're saying I don't need to go that path. I'm going a different path.
exactly. And precisely for that reason, Keith, I wrote this book, Finding Your Passion, Living the Dream. And I have a number of people that I'm quoting in this book that have made those choices when they were in their late 30s or in their 40s, and said, for all the reasons that you said, no, I'm going to go a different direction. So the other thing I was going to mention to you, I don't know if you can see it. Yeah,
That's hard
yeah,
to see.
I'm going to send you copies of these books, but can you read what is underneath it, the price?
Oh, it's like 25.47. It's that number you had.
That's
the,
that's
the
why
number when you first showed up.
all my books are priced 25.47.
Well,
Yeah,
that's cool. You got a paradigm for you. Look, what it makes. I understand it. I understand it because you're saying that you're setting that price
yeah,
because it's like that number means a lot to you. But
exactly,
yeah,
exactly, and
that's interesting.
yeah, and so all the books that I do, I write them, and they are available on all major medias, Amazon, and on and on and on. But also Audible, and I
Audible.
read.
Oh, you do it?
I
Is that
do
your
all the
voice?
audio.
Is there your
I
own
think,
voice on Audible?
yeah,
Oh,
I
that's
think
cool.
I if you do Audible, with all due respect to the ones that don't, but you should do it in your own voice. I think that is very, very important. And,
Yeah.
and they've been quite successful, actually.
Yeah, it's interesting. Some people, I think they have that imposter syndrome when it comes to that because they feel, well, I got to be a professional actor. It's like, it's the same kind of reason. Like if you're a songwriter and you don't sing your own song because you don't believe you have the voice, and
Yeah.
then you give it to somebody else, and then and then eventually you discover that you're more successful if you actually sing it, and you might not have the perfect voice,
Yeah.
but your voice is perfect for your material because you wrote it.
Yeah.
And that's why the singer songwriter is very authentic, right?
Yeah.
And it's very honest because like that person wrote that song and they're singing that song. And
Yes.
it's not any kind of putting down people who are professional singers and they don't
No,
write their stuff.
no, no.
But there's something when you actually do it and you wrote it, it just seems like a full performance.
One of my most favorable one is Eric Clapton, "Wonderful Night," and
Mm,
the music and the song and the other fella, perfect, that wrote the song. Anyway, so yeah, I
yeah.
I love the music and and the artists that are very, very good at what they are doing. So yeah.
But I think it's cool that you actually used your own voice because I think it brings that authenticity to the because like you wrote it and then you're talking it and you're speaking it and it feels like the full circle project.
Yeah.
It's your voice
Yes.
in the words and in the audio. you know.
So the other thing that I feel, Keith, and I'm sure you will agree with me, is that social media has become big, and then that. But from when I grew up 20, 30 years ago, people used to interact more. They have
Mhm.
dinner together. They go get together in some other settings that they have, and then COVID came, that kind of disappeared to a certain extent. But then before COVID, and you already did some of that, so did I to a certain extent. I started to do on television, local television more than anything, interviews about different subjects, mainly the lumber industry. And then COVID came, and so we couldn't do that anymore because the studio was closed. So
Mhm.
then I had an apartment, where I do my own podcasting from now, and we developed a studio there and say, let's start podcasting, uh, and
Online.
and
Yeah.
and we started podcasting, and then the further we get into it, and we were already well over 100 then, I think, and although we have amazing people here in our region and area, but it is still limited. Prince George has about 80,000 people, 200,000 people in northern BC probably, and so an amazing amount of uh, uh, talents and people that we had on podcasting, and say we have to make it broader. And so
Yeah. Yeah. You can go
we joined
international.
up to Podmatch, and
Yeah.
Podmatch opened the door for us to do the global thing. And
Yeah.
so I'm not podcasting. I don't know if we came through podcasts, but we likely did. And and so it opened the world.
Yeah.
And
It's an interesting thing because we started back in 2016 using Instagram.
right,
So what we used to do, and we still do with our musician friends, is
right,
I'm a musician and I post on Instagram, and then
right,
what would happen is other musicians would go and like my post,
yeah,
and then I would send them a pitch. Hey, you want to get interviewed like a behind the music type of interview on my podcast? It's free. Just come on
yeah,
the show and talk about your art.
yeah,
And I would get 4 or 5 people a month just doing that in the
yeah,
beginning back in 2016. And
yeah,
then it started building because I would get, their agents would tell other artists, and then I would start getting artists coming in. It was just, but it was still using like an online capability. I was using the fact that
that's it.
Instagram allowed me to post. I had a certain base of people there, and they would be giving me all these like these pitches were providing guests. And
Yes,
then tools like Podmatch would become like, oh, it's like a Tinder for podcast guest and host, and now you get matched, and now you have an even more opportunity. But it's
Exactly.
just that the presence on social media and the internet tools that are
Yes.
out there. What I liked, even back in 2016, I was interviewing people from bands from South Africa, Germany, US, Japan,
Amazing. Yeah.
Australia. It wasn't just like, oh, I'm on PBS, I'm only talking to people in New Hampshire, which is what it would have been 20 years ago. Like you could only talk to
So did you?
musicians in New England, with maybe Boston, maybe New York,
Yeah.
Northeast. And he's like, maybe once in a while I could catch some guy coming through Boston and talk to him and they came from LA or something, but you would never be able to reach somebody from
No.
Tokyo.
No. And the interesting part about it, Keith, is that it's there you and me are having a discussion, developing a friendship, really having so many things similar, and then you're in New Hampshire and I'm on the other side of North America in British Columbia, 500 miles north of Vancouver, and so we just met and we've been talking for about an hour already. But the interesting part about it is that because of your people all around you and the medias that you connect to, same with us, tens of thousands of people will be listening to you and me having a conversation. And
Yeah.
that's is the amazing thing about this podcasting is it's still on its infancy. It's still relatively new. Like for us, I think it was 2018, 2019 when we first got involved and doing it on a local basis, as you did. And by now it's expanding. And then now we are global. I talk to people in Central Europe, South America, you name it, I talk to them, and on all kinds of different topics and subjects. It is amazing.
Yeah, it's exponential growth, and it helps me as a musician. People said when I first started doing it, they said, "Well, you're a musician. Why would you talk to a CEO? You're a musician. Why would you talk to a filmmaker? Like, why would you talk to a therapist?" I said, "Well, don't you read? Don't you listen to songwriters?
Exactly.
Songwriters, we tell stories like a filmmaker or an author tells stories. We don't
Exactly.
just tell stories about what we know. We
No.
put ourselves. We create characters."
Yeah.
And so the idea, what I also said is, the idea of being creative. Well, a CEO is creative, an entrepreneur is creative, a lecturer is creative, a therapist is creative. They figure out how to read the person.
And
And a
and then
musician, you read the crowd. If you're a public speaker, you read the crowd. If you're going to be successful, you read the audience.
and
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 so,
so precisely on that I do with my podcasting, I do with my writing of the book, the publications, and the public speaking that I do. I'm a storyteller. That's who I am.
mhm,
and
yeah.
and that's what I love about it, and that's what makes me successful.
Well, also I like about it, it's in a world that's got 90-second, 30-second, 60-second clips. Podcasters tend to go 30 minutes or an hour. Some of
Exactly.
you can go, like some of the big ones go 2 hours. And so in a world where people tell you, like A&R people and the people who do the promotions is, oh, you should keep that down to 15 minutes. It's like, no, in this form, the long form version of it is why people like it, because it's authentic and they feel like it's not an infomercial. They
Exactly.
feel it's like they're like a live radio broadcast, and it
Exactly.
feels they get drawn in because they get to know people. They get to
Exactly.
know the guest. They get to know the host. They it's interesting, and it feels like it wasn't manufactured. And so I think in
Exactly.
a world where people see so many manufactured things, they're kind of fake. They like the idea that it's real.
Yeah, I agree with you. And so that's it's interesting, and that will go further, and that will go broader, and but it's still on its infancy, and it's an amazing forum because that I could go all over North America and do presentations to 200, 300, 400 people. If I do, I may get a fee for it, but it will probably take me 2 days. Here I can have interaction with you, and at the same time, I know that there will be tens of thousands of people around us looking at what we have to discuss, and finding it extremely interesting. And that will again stimulate other interactions. So that's why this forum is still in its beginnings and still will go much further.
Yeah, it's a really cool way to to look at it. Like if I think about all the 1,000 interviews I've had, I got a Rolodex of like 1,000 people
Yeah,
I've talked to, and I've had
um,
many people come back 3, 4, 5 times, right?
exactly.
And so I've got relationships where I had a bunch of musicians one time. We decided to do a 3-day festival, and all of them did it for free. We had 30 bands play 3 days,
God.
and we didn't pay them at all. We just said because they knew me and I knew them. We everybody had a 30-minute set, and we did a bedroom producer festival for 3 days live.
My goodness.
And we did it like in 2021 and 2022. We didn't do it this year, but we're thinking about next year. But it was just cool that you could, and I didn't even work with agents. I worked directly with artists. And
Yeah.
it was like having a real relationship, because
Yes.
it is a real relationship. Say, well, you can't have a real relationship on the net. Well, I end up having a lot of connections with a lot of people that I can call them up right now, and we just chat. And it's not like, well, you're costing me money. No, they'll talk to me like they're a friend. They're a colleague. They're somebody I can actually have
It,
a communication with that's real.
and the same thing is happening with podcasting, is that with the 200 some odd people that I have interacted with them, they become friends. And even if I, talk to them or want to give one of them a call, or they call me and say, I want to share with you a bit of an update. Would you have time to do? I said, sure. Yeah. Or I may ask them for whatever reason. You develop those relationships, and that the other day I was at Costco here walking through the store. I think it was yesterday or the day before, and somebody just came up to me. I have no idea who the person was. He said, I like your podcast. I watch all of them. I said, okay, good.
That's always cool. That's always cool when you go somewhere and somebody recognizes you, kind of like, oh wow, I'm getting bigger. Like,
Yeah.
but yeah, it wasn't I never did it for that, because all you're doing is like, I do it because I like to talk to people.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I also like the opportunities that come, because I get opportunities to, like, I've been working with some companies.
Yeah.
I get, because I'm a software guy, but I talk on this podcast.
Sure.
And I got an opportunity to like beta test a music software system,
Sure.
because I talked about, creativity, and I had a really productive conversation with one of the guys, and I was actually doing some work, and I'm not asking for money or anything, but it's like, sometimes you get opportunities, and because you're not talking about the dollar, and you get interested, then sometimes things will just happen.
Exactly.
That actually give you opportunities, if you're not always grabbing for the money. If you do it because you think it's interesting. If you give somebody a shot and you consult with them, you give them an idea, and you say, well, that's kind of a freebie, but I think people need to understand, it's like that elevator pitch, or that hallway conversation, or you're at the golf course and you're talking to somebody. You can have those kind of interactions here on the internet.
Exactly.
And they can be just as productive as what was on the golf course.
Or more.
Yeah, you could have even more of them, because there's more people you're dealing with.
I have got to go into a meeting in the next 5 to 10 minutes.
Okay. Yeah, it's fine.
I really enjoyed being on your podcast, and really being a pleasure to me, and hearing your perspective. And I'm really impressed with your background and all the things that you're doing. And I thank you for the opportunity to have the privilege to be on your show.
We want to let people know about your link again. That's http www.johnabrink.com. That will be fully clickable when we're published. We're on all the major podcast platforms. We'll be sending you a landing page tomorrow, and all the individual links. So look forward to that. We've been live on Facebook, YouTube, and Twitch. Those links are active right now and will be active going forward. And thank you again for being a guest on the Family Electric Ghost podcast, and have a great evening.
Thanks, Keith. Take care. Stay in touch.
Have a good night.
Good night.
Good night.
Merry Christmas.